Well, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Forensic Psychology. We're really lucky to be joined by Professor Leam Craig. Liam is a consultant forensic and clinical psychologist and partner at Forensic Psychology Practice Ltd. He's chartered and dual registered clinical and forensic and holds visiting professors at Birmingham City University, University of Lincoln and the University of Birmingham. So he's very busy. He's got vast experience of working in different forensic settings and numerous publications, which we'll talk about later. Liam's worked for over 26 years as an expert witness and given evidence before magistrates, family and crown courts, military courts, courts of appeal, mental health tribunals and parole boards. He's co-authored a Ministry of Justice research report into the use of expert witnesses in family court and former chair of the BPS Expert Witness Advisory Group. Has contributed to 6 guidance documents written by psychologists. So you've been very busy, and you also fly, don't you? Also fly
I do,
planes.
yes.
You're
So very busy.
part-time.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really nice to see you again, Liam. And it's been nice that our paths have crossed many times over the years. It's lovely to see you, and thanks for joining us.
Well,
Could you tell us first a bit about your route into forensic psychology?
yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you, Jerry and Emily, for the kind invitation to participate. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, my path into forensic psychology, had an undergraduate degree in psychology, and then I've got a Master of Science degree in forensic psychology. And then after that, I worked as a research assistant in a human psychopharmacology research unit at the University of Surrey. And that was really interesting. It wasn't anything to do with forensic psychology, but I learned a lot about the brain and how the brain works. And this unit, we were testing new medications for pharmaceutical companies, looking for side effects on new drugs. And we were testing antidepressants, anti-epileptic medication. We were even testing levels of caffeine in coffee, and they were trying to produce a new instant tea. And my role was to measure cognitive impact of these different drugs or medications. So I had to complete a battery of tests on human guinea pigs that were living in the unit at the time. And I was measuring things like cognitive ability, cognitive agility, attention, memory, concentration, throughout various stages throughout the day. And we also used EEG caps, monitoring brain pathways patterns during sleep. And so I did that for a little while, but that nothing to do with forensic work, but I learned a lot about how the brain works, how cognitive ability, cognitive agility, memory, capacity, attention, concentration, how all those things work, which gave me a good sort of standing, a good stead when I later started to work in hospitals and then after that to complete mental capacity assessments. So that's my very early experiences. After that, I worked as a trainee in forensic psychiatric hospitals. Um, and I did that for quite a few years. And over a period of my sort of training, if you like, by the time I'd qualified, I'd worked in uh, 3 different psychiatric hospitals across 4 different wards. And I also worked in probation services. I worked across 3 different probation areas at the time, doing various things with probation services, risk assessments, and that kind of thing. Um, and that brought me to the point of qualification. And then after that, I continued to work in psychiatric services. I then completed further training to become dual qualified in clinical and forensic psychology, and then continued in psychiatric services. Went on to become head of psychology to 3 community forensic psychiatric units for detained patients. Did that for quite a few years. And then after that, worked in probation services, worked in Northern Ireland prison services, contracted services to prisons in England and Wales, doing lots of parole board reports, lots of SARNs, the old SARN reports. I did hundreds of SARN reports for HMPPS. So that's been my sort of pathway, really, if you like, in forensic psychology.
And then thinking about now, so you specialize in expert witness work. before we go into like how and what that looks like, how did you know that that was what you wanted to specialize in?
The forensic psychology started like long before the expert witness work. So it was all about understanding people,
Yeah.
understanding offending behavior and pathways to that. That was the real driver then. And then later on, it was just forensic psychology, but in a different context. So I'd spent my early career working in hospitals, in probation services, in prisons, um, and I'd seen most of the occasions where people getting themselves caught in the justice system, except for the court bit. I'd done the bits that happen after people have been to court, but not the bits before they get to court. So that was a sort of that was a pathway that took me into the courts, having done the areas later on, if you like.
So you really have done all the steps in the criminal justice pathway.
Yeah, I can't think of anything I've missed. I've even done the Court of Appeal, which is the end where people appeal their convictions and have their convictions quashed. I've done quite a bit of Court of Appeal cases as well.
What was it about what was it about then court that captured you as opposed to staying into like psychiatric services or prison? Why was that your calling?
I think it was a different kind of challenge. Court work is very different from a jobbing psychologist who's working in a hospital or working in probation or working in a prison setting. You're either delivering interventions, like one-to-one interventions, or sometimes group interventions, or you're writing reports or something like that. And court is just very different from all of that. It's still psychology. You're applying psychology, but in a very different way. And it was that sort of difference that really sort of got my attention, if you like.
What do you like about it then? Because it can be sort of a bit cut and thrust being in a court, and you never really know what people are going to ask you, and sort of prepare as well as you can, and then the people can sometimes give you a bit of a curveball question.
Oh, it is absolutely cut and thrust. I like the challenge.
Mm.
It was the closest analogy I can think of is a bit like mental gymnastics.
Mm.
You're standing in the dock, and you're having difficult questions fired at you, and there's nowhere to hide. There's no one to ask what's the answer. There's nobody there to hold your hand, and you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to be able to communicate that in a way that people understand it, whether it be the barristers or the judge or the jury. And I quite enjoy, it's probably sadistic, but I quite enjoy the crossing swords with barristers. Sometimes I come off worse, sometimes I kind of come out okay, but it's that sort of that challenge that I really enjoy.
I have only, well, a few years been qualified and thinking about options in the future. And whenever my peers around me, we think about what options there are, people kind of, there's a definite fear around being an expert witness and being in court. And oh God, I shouldn't do that yet. I should wait until I'm far more qualified or, much further down the line. What advice would you give to somebody of any newly qualified or really qualified status about being an expert witness?
I think the sense or feeling of fear is justified, but however, with proper supervision and support, people can overcome that. So if I talk about my sort of pathway, if you like, as an expert witness, as I was training, and certainly for the years after I qualified, I'd follow my clinical supervisors around who were doing a bit of expert witness work then. And it's a bit like the barristers pupillage scheme, where junior barristers will have their first six and their second six in chambers, and after that they'll then join chambers, and that's called their pupillage. And I had a very similar experience with my supervisors. I'd follow them around, I'd get involved in the assessments, I'd sit in council conferences with barristers and judges, and I'd watch my supervisors giving evidence, and how they responded to questions and how they behaved in court. And I did that for quite a few years, probably 4 or 5 years, even before I took on my first case. So there was a real sort of shadowing period after I was qualified to get me used to it. And when I started to take on my first case, they were carefully selected by my supervisor. Even though I was qualified, I still had supervision. And they were carefully selected cases, not particularly complex, not particularly controversial, relatively straightforward kinds of cases. And then you start to build your experience, build your confidence, you start to build a reputation. And then over time, you take on more complex cases, whether it's in the family court or the Crown Court or the appeal court. And it kind of builds over time. So there is the initial sense of, panic and fear. And I started out giving evidence in mental health review tribunals when I was in hospitals. And that's a very genteel, nice introduction. It's inquisitorial, not particularly adversarial. And then I started doing parole board reports. And again, that parole boards are supposed to be inquisitorial, but I think they're becoming more adversarial. But again, it's a good way to get practice and experience in talking and giving psychological opinion before you then open yourself up to the family courts and the Crown courts, which are incredibly adversarial and as you say, sort of real sort of cut and thrust kind of places. If you can, if you're training or if you're qualified and you're looking to get into expert witness work, try and shadow someone who has experience as an expert in the court system, and sort of see how they do it, do the sort of pupillage bit, if you like, before you sort of take on cases. I've chaired BPS disciplinary hearings and given evidence at HCPC disciplinary panels where qualified psychologists have gotten into trouble in court because they've strayed outside of expertise, or they've done the wrong assessment, or something's not gone well. And when I was training, it was drilled into me every supervision session: the fastest way to end your career is to work as an expert witness, because when it goes wrong, it can go spectacularly wrong. And there's nobody there. You're in the dock by yourself. There's no one to talk to. There's no one to put an arm of support and comfort around you. And you're there alone, and you just can't hide. There is nowhere to hide. So I would say shadow someone if you can. When I was towards the end of my tenure as chair of EWAG, the BPS were revising their register, replacing their directory of expert witnesses to become a register. And we were talking then about recommending a shadowing period or pupillage type period for psychologists to sort of follow before going into work as an expert witness. People want to embark on this route, expert witness work. I suppose my advice would be try to get as much experience as you can in a forensic world, in the clinical world. Doesn't matter who the person is, who the individual is, it's still psychology. And when you go to court, in effect, all bets are off. You're the one standing in the dock by yourself. If it's a Crown Court, there might be 40 odd people looking at you. They are listening to every word you say. They're looking at every gesture that you make. They can hear every sigh that you make. And you can hear a pin drop in court, and everybody is listening to you, watching you. And you need that knowledge in your head that if they ask you a question, and it'll be psychology related, but it might be kind of left field, you're the expert, you're expected to know the answers. And you can say, I don't know the answer to that, which is fine, but then there's issues around credibility. Are you a credible expert? Are you a believable expert? Are you erudite and urbane under challenge and conflict? So yeah, I'd say to people, get as much experience as you can in a forensic setting or in a clinical setting, and then try to shadow someone so you can see it, you can see what it looks like, what it feels like. Just as a sort of related thought that passes through my mind is, as I was going through a court bundle a few months ago, and I saw the CV of a psychologist, and I teach expert witness skills on the forensic masters and the doctorate masters, and about a year earlier I was teaching this sort of lecture, and then about 12 months later I saw this person's CV in a court bundle. And I thought, crikey, that's brave. They've been qualified for maybe a year, maybe slightly less than a year, and they're putting the CV forward in a family court matter. And if you bear in mind, the BPS guidance is that even after qualification, you're expected to have 2 years of supervision post-qualification. So I would say that, I don't know, maybe that person's very brave, maybe that person's, the best, amazing psychologist, they've got all the answers. But for me, it was drilled into me, this is the fastest way to end your career, because if it goes wrong, you won't get instructed again. And I don't advertise as an expert, but I get a lot of work, and that's all through reputation, that one solicitor likes what you do. They'll pass your name on to another solicitor, or a barrister has seen you in court and they want to instruct you again. So your feedback as an expert is your repeated instruction. When things go bad, you don't get instructed again. So that's not happened to me so far. So hopefully it's not gone bad. It's not gone catastrophic for me so far. But I think for an early career psychologist, really shadowing and getting experience really is your that's the way to save you, sort of thing. That's your bulletproof vest.
Yeah. I don't know if people know who work in the prison, if there's a parole board going ahead in that prison, you can request to the chair of the parole board to sit and watch it, and it's definitely a good thing to do.
Yeah.
As you say, just to familiarise yourself with what might be asked, because they have a pattern. And once you get to know the pattern, you know what to expect, really. I'm not sure if it's the same with the tribunal, whether you'd be allowed to observe one as well. But of course, anybody can go into a Crown Court any time and watch a case going ahead. And they're all.
Yeah. So I've suggested that before. I've asked the judge if my assistant or my trainee can sit in, just an observer, and I explain the reasons why. And the judges are more than happy with that, because the judges understand tomorrow's expert. They're training today. Tomorrow they'll be the expert giving evidence, and you've got to learn how to do it somewhere. So the judges understand it. There was a tricky moment some years ago. I was giving my evidence, and I had an assistant with me, and the assistant administered the psychometrics, and I was there supervising, but I didn't administer them. And the barrister then asked the judge whether it'd be appropriate to have my assistant in the dock to ask my assistant questions about the psychometrics that she administered, at which point I had to intervene and remind His Honour that the assistant was assisting me. The assistant is not qualified to give psychological opinion, and I can give the opinion on the psychometrics. At which point the judge accepted that, and my assistant's anxiety went from 100 down to 0 again, and she felt better after that. The judges understand. People have to learn somehow, somewhere, how to do it, and usually they're very accommodating.
And I like the way you describe it as a sort of a pupillage, because that would be familiar terms for the people in a court, wouldn't they? And that they would know
exactly
that route. But it does sound like a really logical way to gain experience.
It does. And as I say, I have assistants with me who administer psychometrics, and I'm asked questions by barristers about that. And I simply explain this is a pupillage scheme. Whether the person's qualified or whether they're training, they are learning how to do it. And the barristers go, that's fine, no problem with that. Very similar to junior doctors. We'll have a consultant doctor overseeing their work. Very, very similar sort of situation. And the judges accept that.
I've never heard someone having the luxury of that amount of time. 5 years is a long time, isn't it, to get that sort of...
Well, I had very, very good clinical supervisors, and they were very aware of the dangers of throwing me to the wolves in court when I'm either not prepared or ill prepared or not ready to face the kind of challenge. So as I say, I started out in a genteel hospital setting, and then parole boards in prisons, and then you kind of gradually build up the impact before you're ready to take on the family court and the crown courts and the appeal courts. In those kinds of scenarios, particularly in the family court, there might be 4 or more parties. In the family courts and the crown courts, there might be multiple parties. I've done a couple of murder trials and conspiracy to murder trials where there's 6 barristers. Each barrister wants to advance their case, and each one wants a pound of flesh in order to advance their case. And you've got to stand, it might be all day. I've given evidence over 2 days before, and you've got to stand and defend your position, your opinion, and your conclusions.
It sounds like there's quite a variety in the different settings and how they might come across and how they might feel to you as a witness.
Yeah. So mental health youth tribunals are very, as I say, very nice introduction, and then they, as you go up to the court system, things become increasingly more aggressive and more adversarial. And for 6 years, I was instructed by the United States Air Force European Air Defense Council, and I've given evidence at United States Air Force military court martials, and that's very different again. So the rules are different. Your role as an expert is slightly different. The psychology is the same. Human behavior is the same, regardless of the jurisdiction, but the law is different, and how the law sort of interprets you as an expert and how you can give evidence in court is different. And military courts are very fast paced. They are swift and harsh compared to what we're used to in the UK criminal courts.
So for those people stationed over in this country, or were you going to America for that?
Well, Europe. So it was Ramstein Air Base in Germany. That's where the European Air Defence Council are based. But they've also got bases in the UK. So I've given evidence in UK air bases as well. And that's quite interesting. You live on the air base for a couple of weeks at a time. And I've lived in air bases before in a previous life. So I'm kind of used to how air bases work and how the military work. And again, it's just a different context in which forensic psychology can be applied in a different way.
Yeah, and I don't think we've ever had anybody mention that before, so that's interesting to have something so different. Again, every time we speak to somebody, they've got a different experience, and you think, wow, that's another area we haven't heard about before. So it's great to hear.
Yes, so when I was training as a trainee and then as a qualified, I never thought I'd work as an expert witness. There's no definition of what an expert is. There's no definition of an expert witness. There are procedural rules that tell you what the courts expect from an expert, but I never really thought I'd work as an expert. But now, yeah, I do it quite a lot. I've given evidence in almost 300 cases, I think, in a range of different judicial settings.
And did you work in Northern Ireland as well?
Yeah, so I did about 6 years contracted services in Northern Ireland, and they have parole commissioners over there, very similar to the parole board in England and Wales. And I was doing lots of risk assessment reports in Northern Ireland with a whole range of different kind of behaviours.
And how did you find that? Because again, they've probably got different laws as well.
Well, they have, and there's slight quirks about what you can do and can't do, and what you can and can't say during the parole commissioners, and depending on who it is you are completing assessment of at that time, there are some things you can talk about and some things that you're not required to. And I remember being at a parole board, and one of the panels challenged me that I hadn't asked, this particular area of someone's history. And I said, well, that's a governmental direction. You need to take that up with Parliament, not up with me.
Well, that's really interesting. Again, and it's sort of learning the jurisdiction of the different settings as well. and how they all differ slightly.
Definitely, yeah. And so, as I say, the psychology is the same. You know, people are the same, human behaviour is the same, but you do have to learn different laws and what you, as an expert witness, are allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, and how your evidence fits in to those different courts.
Is there any setting that you haven't been an expert witness in that you would like to be?
I was in EWAC. Well, I don't know if you keep up to date with expert witness issues, but psychologists in particular, expert witness psychologists have been the centre of controversy in the last probably 3 or 4 years in the family courts. And I was invited to a parliamentary round table in Westminster in 2023 to talk to ministers about the instruction of psychologists in the family court, and particularly to do with issues around alleged parental alienation. And that's hit the news quite a lot, and the Guardian were running a stream of articles about what they refer to as rogue psychologists, or sometimes people who are given evidence who are not regulated psychologists in cases of alleged parental alienation. So I've worked with the Family Justice Council. When I was in chair of EWAG, we produced 2 guidance documents jointly between the BPS and the Family Justice Council to help to provide a bit of clarity to instructing solicitors, to judges, and to psychologists. And as I say, I attended a parliamentary roundtable to just kind of discuss these issues. And it's still a bit of a hot potato. And again, these are things that if you're working in this field that you need to be aware of, you need to keep up to date, not just with your own literature, but what the law says and the various judgments. There's been quite a few significant judgments handed down over the last 18 months or so that's very relevant to psychologists that they need to read up on before going into court.
I find that the guidance or documents that you sort of worked on the British Psychological website are really helpful to sort of just remind yourself when you're going back, because if you haven't done it for a while and you're going back to it, it's quite useful just to polish it up again, and it's sort of a good refresher, isn't it, to read those guidance documents and make sure you're still compliant, because like, as you say, things change. And if you're haven't got the eye on that particular ball, that things change, don't they?
They do, absolutely. And during the COVID period, a lot of evidence was remotely, assessments were remote, and evidence was remote. And still, to a certain extent now, evidence is still remote. But I remember being cross-examined. The first question during COVID, when I'd completed an assessment, was what guidance I had read before completing my remote assessment. And the irony of it was that I was being interviewed, well, being challenged by a barrister via video link about my assessment that I'd conducted via video link.
And you probably read the guidance as well.
Well, it was helpful that I could say to the barrister that I had read the guidance because I chaired the committee that wrote the guidance, and it was listed in my report. So the barrister then moved on to something else. But it shows that if you haven't read the guidance, you know, barristers are incredibly sharp. They're not psychologists, but they are experts at interrogating people, interrogating data, and analyzing information. They're experts in seeing gaps in logic, and they know how to pull an argument apart, and they'll pull at a thread, and before you know it, your whole argument, your whole theory is just dismantled in front of you. So yeah, you
shatter your confidence if nothing else.
Yeah, so you do have to read, you have to keep abreast of judgments and literature and BPS guidance. You know, it is on the BPS website. I absolutely recommend people to read that, download that. Well worth doing that.
Do you have a wardrobe of really powerful suits that you wear when you're in court?
It depends if I'm remote or not. if I'm remote, I've got a shirt and tie and jacket on. I'm usually in shorts and slippers after that. I don't think I'll get away with that in person.
No, no.
So from the inside of a courtroom to the inside of a book, you have also edited 14 books, including your most recent, and the title is What Works in Correctional Rehabilitation, 2nd edition. So firstly, congratulations. And
Thank
then
you.
secondly, what do you find enjoyable about writing? And also tell us about the book.
Well, yes, please. It's available all good and bad bookstores, in person or online. Please buy lots of copies for your friends and family. Make a nice birthday present or Christmas gift. I like, and I suppose there's two angles to this in the answer to the question. So I quite like sort of adding to the knowledge base, the scientific literature of what we know. There's something nice about advancing theory or advancing our understanding on the assessments of treatment need or the assessments of risk, or advancing ideas around rehabilitation for people who have found themselves in some difficulties. So I quite enjoy that sort of pushing the boundaries, if you like, and just adding a little bit each time to our knowledge base about what we know works in rehabilitative courses and programs. So I quite like that. And then the other part of that is working as an expert. Well, throughout my sort of career, every time I've worked in a new area, I've felt the need to research into that area, whether it's working with child maltreatment or people commit sexual offences or violent offences or people with intellectual disabilities. And so when I've worked in that area, I've kind of focused my ideas of research around that and published papers and book chapters and books around that. And then later on, I have this sort of almost like imposter syndrome in the back of my mind that there's no definition of an expert and there's no definition of an expert witness. And no one tells you you're an expert. And it's for you to decide whether you are and whether you feel you can put your CV forward. And then you think, well, I might be an expert, but am I expert enough to give opinion that people have confidence in? And the opinions you give can have huge implications for people, a whole bunch of different people, for a whole bunch of different reasons. So I think to myself, well, I need to do more. I need to write more. I need to be publishing more. And then I might be expert enough. So I go through these periods where I'll write and I'll write and I'll publish. And then I'll think, oh, that's great now. I've published that. I feel better. And then about 2 or 3 months later, I think, well, that's a bit out of date now. We should really, because by the time you've written it, you wrote it a year ago, and it goes to press, and by the time it's out, and it's 12 months later. And I think, well, that's a bit out of date now. I better write something else. So I'll start generating new ideas, and I'll put a proposal together, and I'll start writing book chapters, and I'll submit it to publishers, and they like it, so I'll start writing more. And then as I'm talking now, so this year I published Psychology in the Law in April, and that's about expert witness case studies across a whole range of judicial settings, special educational needs tribunals, mental health tribunals, criminal trials, family courts, a whole bunch of different military court martials is in there. There's a whole bunch of different case studies. Then, as you say, in October, What Works in Correctional Rehabilitation came out, and I'm hugely proud of that. It's a fantastic update, a 10-year update on the 2013 publication. And as I talk now, I'm halfway through my next publishing project, which is expert witness evidence for psychologists. And I was thinking, 6 months ago, I'd finished What Works, and that made me feel better. And then I thought, well, that's a bit old now, isn't it? I need to do something more. Am I expert enough to go to court? And it certainly helps when you are giving evidence to a jury. I was giving evidence in a murder trial a little while ago, and the barrister went through my CV in front of the jury, talking about the awards and the publications. And the reason was not lost on me. He's trying to convince the jury that I'm someone they can trust and they can believe and be confident in what I'm saying. And it certainly helps when you've published a lot and you can actually say to the jury, actually, I have researched this particular behavior and I've published this particular behavior and I kind of know what I'm talking about. It gives them a sense of confidence in their decision making. So they're the two strands as to the reason why I'm almost OCD about writing things and publishing things.
That's fascinating.
A really interesting way of describing it, because Emily and I've written together, and then what we're going to do next. We're always looking for what we're going to do next, and I do feel the same, that we have that duty to publish, you know, what we're learning, so other people to sort of save reinventing a wheel every time the next person comes along. So it's definitely really important to publish, and it's nice to have an edition like this where you've got everything all in one place. If you are looking to be an expert witness, or just, you know, given evidence somewhere, that you can look up what's the most recent thing, what's been said. And it does. We've just waited nearly 2 years for to get a copy of a book we wrote, and it felt out of date as soon as we got it. That's the trouble with the book, isn't it? But we know it's up to date as it could have been at the time, and then that's all you can hope for. And then just see if there's anything since. You can look for something.
That's it. You take on these writing projects and you think, oh, this is a great idea at the time.
Yeah.
You don't realize how much effort and hard work goes into it. And you're halfway through and you think, God, I'm not doing this again. This is my last one.
I know,
and then you submit it, and then 6 months later you think, oh, I've got another idea. I'll do this now. And the publishers like it, and before you know it, you're down that same rabbit hole again.
Yeah. You also run a private practice, and what sort of work do you do for the private practice?
Yeah, so most of it is, I'd say about 60-40 split is expert witness work. As a practice, we also provide contracted psychological services to a number of organisations. So we work with private mental health providers. We are contracted by various local authorities, particularly children's services, to provide psychological services to children's services. And children are looked after children in local authority care. So we do a lot of that kind of work. And we also provide services to sort of an outdoor adventure therapy type environment for children, again, looked after children who are overcoming issues of trauma and difficulties in their background. So that kind of keeps the clinical practice alive, as well as the sort of academic interest, as well as the applied psychology bit in the courts. And there's a certain freedom about working in private practice. There's a peril with that. It comes at a cost, but there's a certain freedom to that. And strangely enough, it does open up unexpected opportunities that you hadn't really thought about. Certainly, I hadn't thought about working in this area. So I've been instructed by the South African Police Service Investigative Psychology Unit, and I was training their investigators and their psychology team some years ago on investigating sexual violence, profiling sexual violence, and sexually motivated serial crime. So that was, again, very unusual down in Johannesburg, very interesting. And for the last 2 years, I've been working in Jordan with the Family Protection and the Juvenile Department of the Public Security Directorate of the Hashimat Kingdom of Jordan. They have these huge long titles for departments. Essentially, it's a specialist unit that investigates gender-based violence and sexual violence. And over the last 2 years, I've been going over to Jordan fairly regularly to train investigators on gender-based violence, sexual violence, interviewing suspects, interviewing victims of trauma, children who have been victims of abuse and trauma. So that's, again, quite unexpected. That seems to sort of come from nowhere, and you get invited or instructed to do these things. And strangely, the last year or so, I've been doing some television work, which is, again, an odd thing as well. I've done a couple of TV shows on the psychology of dismemberment, which is a little odd. And then, yeah. And then last year, I shot a film in a Netflix documentary film in Prague to do with a suspicious death. And I was working with other non-psychology experts. There was a forensic pathologist, and there's a toxicologist, and there was a forensic biomechanic expert, and we were working as a team to sort of piece together the evidence to try to explain the suspicious death in Prague, and that was part of a next Netflix documentary film. So you get all these kind of unexpected opportunities in private practice that you never really thought existed, or you never imagined that would come your way. And I think the last few, South Africa and Jordan and Prague, have all, I think, probably come about because of the reputation as an expert witness. The more work that you do, the sort of your name gets spread around, you develop a profile, a reputation, and you tend to get instructed on more high profile, complex cases. And these kinds of opportunities seem to creep up, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, it's definitely a good variety of work, isn't it? And developing your expertise in lots of different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
And you also, in the private practice, then you support trainees going through to qualification, providing some opportunities for them, which again is a great opportunity for people to get that experience working in different settings.
We have, yes, yeah, for years and years. We've taken on either MSc students or MSc graduates and placement students from the doctorate courses. So at the minute, we've got 3 trainees with their masters, and they're on the training route to qualification. So we do a lot of sort of training and provide a lot of training opportunities. We have a relationship with a university in Cyprus, where we have Cypriot MSc students coming over, and they spend some time with us to get experience on the kind of work that we do. And over the years, we've had Erasmus students from Germany, Belgium, Holland come over, and they come over for anywhere between 6 months and 12 months at a time to gain a bit more of sort of UK forensic psychology experience in all these different areas, whether it's in children's services that we work in, or in the court system that we work in, or in parole boards where we give evidence. So we have a lot of kind of students and interns with us, and I try to adopt the kind of training that I had, that we offer a pupillage to people, that you can just shadow and watch me get crucified in court, and learn what to say, how to say it, sometimes importantly learn what not to say, and that's again good experience for people when they're going to a mental health review tribunal or a parole board, and it's their first time as a trainee sometimes giving evidence, and they've seen someone do it, they know what to expect, and they've got some hints and tips on how to deal with challenges from barristers or deal with difficult questions.
Yeah, that sounds really invaluable.
Yeah.
So is there anything left that you'd like to do that you haven't had a chance to do yet?
I was approached by a defense team in Seattle to do some work on a civil commitment case. I'm in talks at the minute about that. That's very interesting. So again, different law. They've got civil commitment over there. We haven't got that in the UK.
Sorry to interrupt. What would that entail?
Essentially, civil commitment is where somebody is sentenced for a sexual offence. They've completed their prison sentence, and then as they draw to the end of their sentence, they are then civilly committed separately under a civil law into a unit based on what people perceive their risk to be, and then people can stay indefinitely, certainly many years, in this civil detention, not prison detention, but civil detention, until they can demonstrate that their risk has reduced sufficiently to be released from this civil detention. So that again, that's very similar, assessment of risk, and a review of treatment that this person has received, and there's peculiarities to this particular case that require some sort of delicate thought about, and funnily enough, I've published this, and the defence attorney got hold of me because they read one of my books and said, well, you've written the book on it. We want you to come and assess this chap and give us your opinion. So yeah, publishing certainly helps.
Yeah, and I guess that person was looking around to think, I don't even know who to ask about this. And then they found somebody.
Yeah, that's it. You get, as I said, I was invited by the United States Air Force, and over the years I've done 6 years with those guys, and it started out by a major defense attorney looking for an expert, and he was asking around other attorneys, and my name seemed to crop up, and then he approached me and said, "Am I interested? Would I do United States Air Force work?" So that, yeah, it's strange how opportunities kind of open up to you every now and then.
So it sounds like you've still got lots of new things to do. You've got books in the offing as well, more books in the offing.
Yeah, and I'm determined that I'm going to take a break, but I'm not what's going to happen. You know,
Not sure when.
I'll submit this to Wiley, and then in about 3 months'
Yeah.
time, I'll think, oh, that's a bit out of date now.
Yeah.
I need to do something else.
And
But
have
yeah,
you got your conference in, because you often have a Birmingham conference in April about related to sexual offending. Is that going ahead this year?
yeah, so we postponed it this year. So for 14 years, Professor Tony Beach and I have been running this conference together, this 2-day conference, University of Birmingham, called New Directions in the treatment and prevention of sexual abuse. And it was traditionally in the sort of springtime, but last year there was conflicting conferences around, so we're kind of pushing that back towards the autumn. So we're planning that now. So hopefully there'll be something in the autumn time.
Please may you know that if you do decide to take a break and after you've written a book and you still feel this urge to give updates, you're always welcome on this channel. This could be like your other option to writing a book. You could just come on, do an episode with us, tell us about the update, and then you could carry on with your break.
That's fantastic. That'd be great. Thank you very much. I'll take that opportunity.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been really interesting to hear your journey, and look forward to the next parts of it as well, and what's going to come next. And that just remains for us to say, let's talk forensic psychology.